In our last video, we listed down the 10 best contracts in the history of the NBA. Now that's accomplished, it's time to look at the other end of the spectrum, namely the worst contracts in NBA history. While the idea of a best contract is pretty self-explanatory and straightforward to fans, the worst contract depends on whose side you're looking at. Regardless, we were able to come up with a pretty comprehensive list for you to follow. This is so good, in fact, that you'd have to watch until the end to get to know a player whose contract is pretty much the best deal there is for him, but the worst deal ever signed by the team itself. I bet you already have an idea who that guy is. But before all that, let me remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and smash the notification bell button to get the latest updates on all things related to the world of basketball. Starting off the list is Grant Hill, who signed a 7-year deal worth $93 million with the Orlando Magic back in the year 2000. He was at the prime age of 27 and was looking like he could do so much more, especially since he was pegged to play with Tracy McGrady. Unfortunately, no one realized that his ankle injury that he obtained during the last week of the 1999-2000 season would stay for more than 4 years. Due to the issue, he would play for a total of 47 games. What's worse is that he almost died from a post-surgery staph infection in his right elbow in 2003, causing him to miss out the entirety of the 2003 to 2004 season. The infection spread all throughout his body, and just after 5 days post-op, poor Grant got such a high fever and convulsions that he was sent to the ER immediately. Hill himself says that the ordeal put himself so close to checking out. He was hooked in IV antibiotics for 6 months. Despite this bad luck, Hill did come back and start the All-Star game in 2004 and finally went back to his old self during his last year in Orlando. Next, there's the contract between Joakim Noah and the New York Knicks in 2016 for a 4-year stay worth $72.6 million. If anything, the Knicks just shot themselves in the foot when they signed the washed-up Noah to such a big contract because he was in such a bad shape that he played only 29 games in 2015 that it escapes me as to why the Knicks would take Joakim in. To be fair to both parties, Joakim Noah actually played quite well during his peak. From 2009 all the way to 2014, the guy averaged almost 12 points and 11 rebounds plus 3.4 assists per game. He even won 2 All-Stars in consecutive years and was a great player for the Chicago Bulls overall. So had the Knicks signed him up during that time, it would have been a good investment. However, it's a different story since the team literally watched him deteriorate in a span of a year. In fact, Noah dropped his performance even before he suffered a series of injuries that forced him to play for only 29 games in total. Still, the Knicks held onto the idea that Noah could bounce back, but he never did. Instead, they saw him fool around and deal with more injuries, causing him to play for only 40 bad minutes in the 2017 to 2018 season. Moving on to number 8, Joe Smith's secret deal that unraveled pretty quickly. While the players I already mentioned didn't live up to the deal they signed up for, Joe Smith's contract in 1999 was bad because it was deceptive and outright illegal. You see, back then, Joe Smith only publicly signed a 1-year deal with Minnesota followed by a supposed 2-year deal for $2.1 million. However, that wasn't the entire picture. For some reason, his agent brokered a secret deal that would give him a 7-year contract worth $86 million. This was supposedly done to circumvent his salary cap and gain so-called bird rights with the Timberwolves. As luck would have it, Smith's old agent left the agency and soon sued both Smith and Minnesota, which caused quite a racket. The owner and general manager for the Timberwolves got suspended, while the team itself lost not 1 but 4 of the first-round picks. This happened just as Kevin Garnett was starting to pick up steam. It was a massive blow for the team since it arguably ruined them for a decade. And as for Smith, well, he lost a pretty penny after staying with the team for a much smaller but legal contract worth $34 million for 6 years. Then there was Brian Reeves, who did not keep his end of the bargain when he signed with the Vancouver Grizzlies for 6 years, to earn almost $62 million in 1997. Reeves did not just bother to train properly and ate a lot of cheeseburgers to boot. The guy had the gall to claim that he couldn't work out during summer because he supposedly didn't have anyone good enough to play with him in his hometown in Gans, Oklahoma. So naturally, by the end of the lockout, Reeves' weight grew to 315 pounds, which of course caused him to break down prematurely after suffering a back injury in 2001. This meant the end of his unsatisfactory career after just playing 3.5 years worth in his contract. At number 6 is Gilbert Arenas' 2007 contract worth $111 million for 6 years. Just like Joakim Noah, Gilbert Arenas was already slowing down a year prior he was granted a $100 million deal by the Washington Wizards. Unfortunately for him, his knee never really recovered. On top of that, he also got into an armed standoff in the locker room with Javaris Crittenton. He also demanded the Wizards to sign Antoine Jamison as part of his deal, which of course did not end well either. Next, we have Elton Brand and the horrible choice he made for himself that almost ended his career entirely. Here's the thing, originally, Elton Brand was supposed to return to the Los Angeles Clippers, but when the Sixers offered a deal which was $7 million more than his current offer, he thought it best to strike while the iron was hot. Recall that Brand was recovering from an Achilles tendon rupture. He also suffered a shoulder dislocation which caused him to sit out most of his first year in Philly. So the Sixers didn't want anything to do with him afterwards and was released through an amnesty clause in 2012. Davis attempted to return to the Clippers and was promised a $65 million contract for 5 years, but then Donald Sterling turned on him and insulted Davis from the courtside seats. He was then traded to the Cavs. He spent the rest of his year jumping from one bad contract to another. On number 4 is Luol Deng, who got signed by the Lakers in 2016 for a $72 million 4-year contract. Of course, the Lakers signed him thinking that Deng would be a key player during the time. But Deng quickly proved otherwise when he only put up less than 8 points while playing in 45 games during his first year. So by the next season, it was pretty clear that the Lakers didn't want anything to do with him and only allowed him to play a single game. To be honest, the contract ended up the best one for Deng since he made $72 million in just 57 games. While for the Lakers, the deal sucked big time. Then there's Rashard Lewis' 6-year, $180 million contract in 2017 with the Orlando Magic. Signing Lewis is another proof that Orlando isn't really good at drafting contracts or estimating a player's worth since Lewis wasn't even a great player to begin with. He only had one All-Star game to show for his 9 seasons with Seattle. He had an above-average efficiency rating, but that's about it. To make matters worse, Lewis started to decline almost immediately after getting a huge paycheck. Moving on to the top 2 worst contracts in NBA history, Chandler Parsons' 4-year deal that cost the Memphis Grizzlies a sum of $94.5 million in 2016. He did show potential and averaged 13.7 PPG, 4.6 RPG, and a 2.8 APG from the get-go. But just like Lewis, he just wasn't good enough. Plus, he suffered knee injuries that caused him to miss the end of 2 consecutive seasons, which of course is a crucial moment for any team. This proved that he wasn't just worth the money. And finally, the last guy on our list is Washington Wizards' John Wall. He won big time after signing a Supermax contract worth $207 million with the Wizards in 2017 to play for 6 years. Wall is pretty sensitive to this fact and says he deserves the ridiculous sum of money. But just like most of the people who knew better, we beg to differ. The former number 1 pick just isn't worth it anymore, especially after sustaining a series of serious lower body injuries like a ruptured Achilles tendon. Plus, he made over $38 million this year due to the said contract without even touching a ball. If that's how easy it is to become a multi-millionaire, tell me, where do I sign up? And that ends our list of the 10 worst contracts in NBA history. Do you agree with our picks? Please be sure to thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe if you loved it for more awesome content from our channel. Leave a comment down below for what you think our next video should be. Till next time, peace!